Welcome back to another video, guys. Today we're going to be looking at the technical and driving challenges that the Hungaroring presents for Formula 1 teams for this weekend's third round of the 2020 Championship. It's a really short circuit on the calendar, but it's also a brilliant old school one as well and presents a number of fairly unique challenges. Pirelli are bringing the same compounds of tyre that we had at the first two rounds in Austria, the C2, C3 and C4, same compounds that we had at last year's event too, and don't forget the tyres for 2020 are exactly the same as the tyres we had for 2019. So everyone's got a good feel for what these compounds are like around this particular circuit. It's a circuit that's always really hot at this time of the year. Some of the hottest temperatures actually that we see at any point over the course of the entire calendar, and that can have a really serious impact on the cars, the drivers and the tyres and how we approach the weekend. So let's take a look at this brilliant circuit. Okay then, coming out the final corner, actually on a qualifying lap you take quite a different line through that final corner to set yourself up onto this start-finish straight into a DRS zone immediately. It's not a particularly long straight when you compare it to other circuits on the calendar, but this is the longest straight that this circuit has, therefore crucially important. DRS wide open then onto this start-finish straight. I'll just throw it there because you can see that's the finish line with that checkered flag painting on the floor. The start line a few metres further forward there, look, underneath the start line gantry. On we go then, pits to the right hand side, flying up through the gears as we go through here. These are the areas where the teams that are underpowered, like the Ferrari powered teams, are going to struggle along this straight. This is where you're fighting against the downforce because this is a high downforce circuit. So much of this lap requires a lot of downforce. On the straight here, that's where you suffer the penalty of that, of course. So finding the balance between the two, crucially important. Turn 1 is a really big braking zone. Because of the length of this circuit, because the ratios on a Formula 1 car are fixed for the entire year, actually you might find some teams don't even use 8th gear by the time they get to the end of this straight. Some you might find, historically we found, only get up to 7th. Either way, you are flat out approaching the braking zone here into the right-hander, massive jump on the brakes, quite a late apex. You can even afford to miss the apex because again at this corner the exit is critically important. Now I'm going to stop it there. Can you just see the white line just ahead of me? That is the DRS activation line coming out of this corner. Just there it is in front of the car now, and look at the angle of the steering wheel at the point that that DRS line activates. So just here we are flat out back on the throttle. You heard the beep, that is the point where we can open the rear wing, button on the back of the steering wheel here on the McLaren. As the car is getting its power down, the rear wing is opening and dumping a load of downforce. It is easy at this point to spit the rear end out slightly as you jump on the power and try to accelerate down to this next section of the circuit. So onto the power as early as you can. You can use a little bit of curb but not too much. Now the circuit falls away. We're going downhill, much steeper than it actually looks here. Let's bring it to a halt again, coming towards the braking zone for turn 2, which is a really tricky corner. Partly tricky because as you can see from the driver's eye view here, you can't quite see the apex. It's a late apex further around that corner that you can see. But what doesn't show as clearly on this game is, yes, the circuit's falling away from you in front of you, but actually at the right hand side there's a huge camber on the circuit. It falls away to the right hand side. Now if we've got our car all the way over to the right hand side, right out here on the curbs like you might normally do for a late apex like this, turning in late, the car's unsettled, it's tipping over to the right hand side, the platform is not level, and therefore your front brakes, your front tyres rather, are not equally loaded at the point where you're leaping on the brakes. So for this corner we don't use all the track, we come in towards the middle of the circuit, still braking as we're turning in, trying to keep the platform of the car as level as we can to even out those braking loads. Now the apex comes into view quite some way around the corner. We can clip the inside curb. You can see the circuit falling away from you again unloading the car, really wanting to introduce understeer and the car to push on towards the exit. You've got to be careful of that, you've got to be patient before you get on the power, but then you need to get on it because this next section is flat all the way around this right-hander. Downhill again, not coming all the way to the left-hand side because we need to fling it in as quickly as possible build up the speed, clipping that curb, use the exit curb as well, flat out through that section really fast. And now look what happens. We go back uphill. On the downhill section, it's easy to lose traction as you're trying to get the power down because the weight has transferred forward to the front end of the car as you're heading down the hill. As you try to get the power down, you can easily get wheel spin. But conversely, coming in this uphill section here towards turn 4, this one, really steep uphill climb, which means you can brake really late because you're fighting not only using the brakes of the car, but you're using the forces of gravity which your car's fighting against in climbing up, which means you can brake really late into this one. It's not much of a brake anyway up here, but look, it's totally blind. The driver can't even see the top of the crest, let alone the apex that he's trying to hit. So this is about using your experience, knowing, picking out a reference point on the right hand side, knowing where to turn in. As we climb up the hill, you can just see now, just there, you start to see the apex curb come into view. You need to have picked out a point, a reference point on the right hand side, fling it in, perhaps just a quick drop down a gear, a dab on the brakes. You need to use as much of this curb as you dare to get through here quickly, but too much and you can unsettle the car. And the other point about that is you're reaching the crest of a hill. Now you all know what that feels like when you go over a bump or a crest in your road car. Your stomach goes light if you go over it at speed. Exactly the same thing happens here. The car goes light. And at the point where you're trying to turn and get the power back on again, the back end of the car is losing traction because it's gone light. Easily you can spit the rear end out and end up off the circuit at that point. But you've got to get on the power again. This is probably, I think, something like a 4th gear corner. Seems like it goes on forever. Onto the power again, using the extra curbing on the outside before we then come to this chicane. Now again, really tricky part of the circuit. You've got to be really patient. You can see here, you want to use the curb, but look at the sausage curb just to the right hand side of the red and white curb there. That is brutal. You need to stay off those. Drivers will start to find their feet over the weekend as how much of that they can use and how much they need to be very wary of. You want to try and straight line it as much as possible, but not unsettle the car and launch it into the air as we come through this section here. Now we come into a set of fast flowing corners. Really nice as a driver. It's all about setting one corner up into the other and getting the flow as nice as you possibly can through here. Really enjoyable to drive. This one's flat through here, relying on the downforce of the car. Again with this corner here, relying on the downforce to keep you planted. You need to go through here much faster than you really truly believe you can as you head onto another little short burst. The exit of that final corner there, really important that you can get the power down quickly. Here again, coming towards the end of the lap. Now at this point in the circuit, your tyres are starting to overheat, particularly front tyres with all the induced understeer that these cambers of the circuit want to throw into the car. The tyres can start to overheat towards the end of the lap, and if that happens, you start to really lose grip at a point down here where you need it most. Coming into the final couple of corners, some really tight corners with some undulation as well in the braking zone. This one really tricky with a very late apex. You've got to be really patient getting into the apex late in the corner, trying to keep the car as stable and as level as you can as you brake, although the circuit's doing this and you're trying to turn at the same time. Patient on the power, and then you get on the power. Look, pit lane entry to the right hand side. That can be really tricky in the race if someone's trying to get into the pits and you're on a flying lap. And then into the final corner. Now, in the race, you want to follow pretty much that green line, the guideline that's on the circuit in front of you there, probably in 4th gear, trying to keep your minimum speed up as high as you possibly can to get the exit onto that start-finish straight and get your DRS open again. In qualifying, you might want to be much further out here and almost make the corner into a V section so that you can get an earlier exit and earlier onto the power and back onto that start-finish straight. There we go, DRS open again, and on we go for another lap. What a great circuit it is. Great circuit. It's about balancing your aero platform, keeping as much downforce on the car as you can whilst not compromising the straight too much. and it's about the teams that have the most efficient aero balance that will come out on top in that sense. And then also when you come to the mechanical balance, this is a lot about traction. There's a lot of slow corners onto bursts of power, getting the traction down as early as possible, as smoothly as possible, will not only help you get an absolute VMAX, top VMAX speed at the end of those straights, but will also help to keep the tyres alive. If you're struggling with drivability, with getting the traction down, getting the power down in those traction zones, you start to spin up the tyres, you start to overheat them very quickly. Equally at the front end of the car, really important front end around here. There's so much where the circuit twists and falls away like a ribbon, a flowing ribbon almost, that can really unsettle the car. What you want as a driver and an engineer is as much as possible around a racetrack to keep a level, flat platform of your car from an aerodynamic perspective, but also from a mechanical perspective about how you transfer the weight. You want to be braking as much as you can. You're heavy braking in a straight line so that you can load up both front tyres as equally as possible when the weight transfer falls forward and starts to load them up under the braking zones. If you're offline, if you're off camber, or if you're flinging the car out of one corner into the next at the point you're braking, you start to overload one tyre more than the other, and that's when you lose traction, you break grip, and essentially you slide. And all of those things work the tyres too hard to the point where you get to the end of a lap around here and you've literally got nothing left. So it's about taking what you need out of the tyres in the early part of the lap, but not taking too much that it compromises you by the time you get to the end of it. A really interesting challenge from a driver and team perspective. The driver can bring a lot around here. It's as much about getting into the flow, getting into the groove, a little bit like on a street circuit, as it is the changes that the team can make. So it's about making small tweaks to the setup over the weekend, nothing that's going to really upset the flow the driver's into, to try and give him confidence. Confidence under braking, confidence as he throws the car into some of these quick changes of direction, that when he does that, he knows the aero platform is going to keep the car planted, keep it stuck. You've got to be able to ride the curbs as well. So a slightly softer suspension setup, or a slightly softer ride to be able to cope with some of the more brutal curbs that you need to take to get lap time, is also something that's a real fine balance that we worked on over the course of Friday. They'll have all done loads of work in the simulator to try and arrive there with the optimum setup. Then it becomes about the fine tuning over the course of practice on Friday and Saturday morning. I think it's going to be a really interesting one, this one. I can't wait. I really love going to this circuit. It's in almost like a bowl within a beautiful setting, of course. Because it's in a bowl, actually, the temperatures are really hot. It also doesn't get a huge amount of wind flowing, a lot of airflow around. It's almost in an amphitheatre type bowl, and therefore temperatures can have a huge impact on the temperature of a driver. Tighter drivers can suffer. I remember being at a race here once where a grid girl collapsed under the heat. It was that, simply that hot. That happens a lot. I've had members of our team go down with heat exhaustion here as well. So you can imagine from a driving perspective, stuck into that cockpit with all the gear on, it's a long time to be under those conditions. Same for the pit crew, equally have to suffer with all that gear on too. But also when it comes to the car, we've already seen teams like Renault struggling with overheating. This is not going to help them. There was a lot of question marks about the black bodywork on the new Mercedes livery. Is it going to really have an impact in terms of heat absorption from the sun? Didn't see much of that in Austria. I don't think it's going to be a factor, but if it's going to get tested anywhere, it's likely to be somewhere like this, where the forecast is to be very, very hot. And then the other one is tyres, as I say. Tyres, keeping tyres alive for the entire lap is one of the biggest challenges. And I'm really looking forward to see how this one plays out. Of course, after this, everyone gets a week off. Not quite the summer break we normally get after the Hungarian Grand Prix, but still a much welcome break for everyone that's been on the road for these 3 weeks before we go into another set of 3 weeks back to back as well. I'm loving F1 in 2020 so far. I hope you are too. I hope you're enjoying these track guides. I'll see you again very, very soon. Ta-ra.